in animals, such as fruit flies and mice.
What this gene seems to do is help control the fundamental decision that the brain has to make, which is, when do I stop making cells? When is the brain big enough?
Then his team began searching for that same gene in a family with a history of the disease. And sure enough, they found something. A gene that helps direct brain growth. And crucially, it was defective. Walsh decided to check this finding in other patients.
Once we found this gene, we sequenced it in our kids with the microcephaly disorder, and we found that one family after another had a disabling change in the gene that completely removed its function.
In total, he has found some 21 different mutations responsible for microcephaly. Sometimes one of the DNA's chemical letters is replaced with another letter. Sometimes letters are missing entirely. But whatever the defect is, they all stop the brain cells from dividing at a very early stage of development. Walsh was now certain, thanks to his microcephaly patients, he had found a gene key to the growth of the human brain. Now he decided to compare normal versions of the gene found in healthy humans with the same gene in chimpanzees, our closest relatives. And what he found was astonishing. The gene in humans was radically different from that found in chimps. There had been a large series of mutations. It could be that these mutations were a major factor in the evolution of our huge brains. And this discovery came about only because of Walsh's work with his patients.
I think one of the amazing things for us was the extent to which studying human disease can unexpectedly enlighten us about something like human evolution.
But this is only the beginning of our understanding of the evolution of the human brain. It's an area of research that is now attracting scientists with a range of skills that Darwin would have marveled at. Katie Pollard is a biostatistician. Her life is spent crunching numbers.
What I love about my work is geeking out on a computer and writing programs and thinking about biology. And that in doing this, I'm actually working on something that not just scientists care about, but really every human being can relate to and cares profoundly about. And that's what makes us human.
Pollard has constructed an ambitious computer program. It's designed to highlight DNA that is similar in apes and other animals, but which is very different in humans. That way, she hopes to identify the key DNA that makes us, us.
Out of these 15 million letters that make humans different from chimps, we need to try to figure out which ones were important. And so we use a technique which is to look for places where human is different from chimp, but chimp looks almost identical to the other animals.
She too is looking for DNA relating to the human brain.
The brain is one of the things that's changed the most during human evolution, both in terms of its complexity and its size. And so when we look to find the parts of our genome that make us human, we're particularly interested in finding out whether these are things that are involved in the brain.
It is a huge feat of number crunching. As Pollard loaded in DNA sequences from both humans and chimps.
You basically take a bunch of computer hard drives and you stack them up together. We were able to take a task that would have run for 35 years on a desktop computer and do it in one afternoon.
And at the end of that afternoon, they had a whole array of material charting the differences between humans and chimps. Importantly, many of those differences were not in the actual genes, they were in switches.
It turns out that the vast majority are not genes. Instead, they're pieces of our DNA that we can think of as switches. They're pieces of DNA that turn a nearby gene on or off, that tell it where, in what cells in our body, in what tissue, at what time, or at what level to be operating.
And there was something even more intriguing about those switches.
A large number of them, more than half, were nearby a gene that was involved in the brain.
In Pollard's work, one particular piece of DNA stood out. It was a piece of DNA that is known to be active in the development of one of the key parts of the human brain in the embryo, the cortex. The cortex is that wrinkled outer layer of our brain. It's vital for those defining human capabilities like language, music, and mathematics. When she looked at that DNA in chimps and compared it to the same DNA in a chicken, it was different in just 2 letters. But in humans, it was different by 18 letters. A massive mutation.
This was about as great of a eureka moment as you could have as a scientist.
So here is another intriguing piece of evidence suggesting how DNA can shape our distinctive human qualities. We now know that DNA works in many different ways. Through genes that make the stuff of our bodies, through switches that turn those genes on and off, and through sequences of DNA's chemicals that throw those switches. Taken together, what this all adds up to is a way that we can at last understand how small differences in DNA can generate enormous change.
Basically, you can make massive changes just changing those switches. So a small change, a couple of DNA letters, could have a profound effect.
And so that final Darwinian puzzle, how a human can be so closely related to an ape and yet be so different, is now slowly being answered. 150 years after Darwin first put forward his grand theory to explain the great diversity of life, the scientists who carry on his legacy have advanced his work in wondrous ways.
I think if Darwin were here today, he'd be absolutely stunned, delighted, even moved to see how much his theory has grown.
What we now are able to understand, on the one hand, would just blow him away. But I also think it would give him enormous satisfaction because ultimately, everything we've been learning validates the things that he said.
I think that Darwin was a remarkable scientist and absolutely should be celebrated. However, I do not think that he was the end of evolution. On the contrary, I think he was the beginning. He outlined the major points, but we have discovered more than I think he would have imagined possible.
As we celebrate the 200th birthday of Charles Darwin and the 150th anniversary of his great work, there is still much more to understand about how the endless forms of nature have arisen. And in rising to that challenge, it is likely to continue to advance medicine and come to a better understanding of ourselves as well.